So today what we're learning about is we are rearranging formulas for specific letters. Yesterday in 3.3 day one, we rearranged for y equals each time. All right. Today you're going to be given a specific letter in a formula that you need to rearrange for. All right. So these problems are a little bit weird. Um, in that sometimes you might get a slightly different answer and still be correct. I tried in class kick to put in multiple answers, but it was a little bit challenging to do so. So a lot of times there are multiple answers. You might still be right, but it might mark it wrong. All right. So there are math formulas that are used for specific purposes. So for example, you might have A equals BH. That is the formula for area of a rectangle or area of a parallelogram. Area equals base times height. You might be asked today to rearrange the formula for B equals or for H equals. You might have distance equals rate times time. All right. You might be asked to rearrange the formula for R equals or for T equals, or volume equals length times width times height. You might be asked to rearrange for L equals, or rearrange for W equals, or rearrange for H equals. So when you're given a specific variable to rearrange for, you want to try and get that specific letter all by itself. Just like yesterday, we tried to get the y equals all by itself. Sometimes you're going to have to work backwards and work opposite. Think the opposite operation all the time to try and get that letter all by itself. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, remember you have to do to the other side of the equal sign. So again, these problems are very, very strange. They will always tell you what letter to solve for. The letter that they tell you to solve for is the letter that you want to try and get all by itself. So in this one, where it says solve for B, we want a final answer that starts off with B equals. In this one, it says solve for D. We want a final answer that has the D all by itself and says D equals. So when we go to try and get this B all by itself, you need to take a look at what's on the same side as the B. So we have an A and a plus. To get rid of that A, that's really a positive A. So to get rid of that A from that side, we'd have to do minus A and minus A. Again, whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side. So these A's would cancel out. Bring down your B, bring down your equal sign. 2C minus A. We can't combine like terms. They don't have the same letter, right? So we can't do anything like that. All you're going to do is leave it exactly as it says. B equals 2C minus A. Now, where this gets a little bit confusing is sometimes there's more than one answer. Just leave it as simple as that. It doesn't have to go in order, all right? Your letters don't have to go in like alphabetical order or anything. Technically, this would be a correct answer also if we had like negative A plus 2C. All right, technically these two things are exactly the same, but all that you're going to do is do 2C minus A when we subtract A from both sides. So just leave it as 2C minus A. Don't make it any more complicated than what it actually is. So this would be sort of the preferred answer. Let's take a look at the next one. In the next one, we're solving for D. Now, normally you would take and you would see parentheses and you would distribute right away. We don't want to do that. All right, that just makes things more complicated than what we needed. So this says 3 times this whole thing in parentheses. Well, let's get that whole thing in parentheses first by dividing by 3 and dividing by 3. That way these 3's cancel out. When we bring down the D minus A, we're just going to lose the parentheses. So on this side of the equal sign, we have 4G divided by 3. We're just going to leave it as 4G divided by 3. Now, if that 3 happened to go into 4 evenly, like if that was a 2, then we could change it to be 2G. But because it doesn't go in there evenly, we're just going to leave it how it is. We're trying to get the d all by itself, so we need to get rid of the minus a. We would get rid of the minus a by doing plus a and plus a. So what we end up with an answer is we have 4g divided by 3 plus a. That a is being added to that whole thing. It's not just being added to the 3. So we're just going to leave our answer like that. As weird as it looks, that's how we're going to leave it. In the next one, f equals ma. So we're going to solve for m. So we want to try and get that m all by itself. Well, when two letters are next to each other, that really means times. That really means m times a. The opposite of times is divide. So we want to get that m all by itself. So we want to divide by a and divide by a, because that way those a's will cancel out. So all that we have here is f divided by a equals m, and that's our answer. E equals mc squared. We're solving for c, so we want to try and get that c all by itself. Well, you have an m times c squared. We want to get rid of that m first to try and get that c squared all by itself. So the opposite of times would be divide. So we want to divide by m and divide by m. So we have e divided by m equals c squared. Now, this is probably something that you've never actually done before. The opposite of squaring a number, all right? Because that really says c squared or c to the second power. The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. The square root is that little check mark symbol, all right? That's the square root of a number. So to undo that squaring of a number, we need to take the square root and take the square root of the number. That gets the c all by itself, right? Because squaring and square roots are opposites of each other. They just cancel each other out. So what you end up with as an answer is the square root of e divided by m, all right? You're taking the square root of the whole entire side. Let's take a look at the next one. Go ahead and try this one on your own, please. Go ahead and try solving for r on your own, please. So we want to try and get that r all by itself. There's a couple different ways that you could do it, which is why I wanted you to try this one on your own. There's a couple different ways to do this one, and all of the answers are correct. Now, when you're multiplying three things together, we have 2 times the pi symbol times r. When you're multiplying things together like that, I could actually divide by 2 pi and 2 pi all at once, so that those cancel out and those cancel out. So you would get c divided by 2 pi equals r. That's one of the possible answers. Another possible answer, I'm just going to rewrite the problem here. Another possible answer that you could have, you could divide by 2 first and divide by 2 first. So we have c divided by 2 equals pi r. And now pi times r, the opposite of times is divide, we could divide this whole thing by pi. So you really end up getting c divided by 2 divided by pi equals r. This would be a fine answer as well, all right? Both of these things, as different as they are, mean the same exact thing. Now, you might have a totally different answer as well. I'm going to try and squeeze it in right here. C equals 2 pi r. You might have a totally different answer as well if maybe you divided by pi first and divided by pi first. Instead of dividing by 2 first here, you could divide by pi and divide by pi. So now I have c divided by pi equals 2r. Divide by 2, divide the whole thing by 2. So I could get c divided by pi all over 2 equals R. So all three of those circled answers are all correct. They look very different, but they all essentially mean the same thing, which is very weird and strange, but that happens with this topic. Right? So it all depends on what you do. This blue way is obviously the easiest way. When you have three things that you're multiplying all together, you can divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for at once. And that's going to sort of simplify your answer a little bit. Let's take a look at the next one because it happens to be like the same kind of thing. We're solving for the H. So we want to get that H all by itself. Again, when you're multiplying multiple things together, because we have pi times r squared times h. All right, when we're solving for this all together, you can divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for all at once. So because we're multiplying by pi times r squared times h, I want to divide by pi r squared on both sides at the same time, just like we did over here in the blue. So that way my pi's cancel out and my r squares cancel out, and I get an answer of v over pi r squared equals h. That's the simplest answer that you can do. Now, this one lends itself to the same way. You could get multiple answers if you divide by just pi and just pi first, and then divide by r squared and divide by r squared, or the opposite of that, divide by r squareds and then divide by pi's. It's easier to do it all at once. But again, a lot of these questions have multiple answers. So take a look at the next one. A equals pi r squared. Now in this one, we're solving for the r. So we want to try and get that r all by itself. In order to do that, we need to get rid of, this says pi times r. We need to get rid of the pi and get rid of the pi. So divide by pi, divide by pi. So we have a divided by pi equals r squared. Now, like I said before, the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. The square root of r squared is just r. So we want to take the square root, and that square root cancel each other out, so we're just left with r. When you take the square root, you got to take the square root of the whole thing. So it becomes the square root of a divided by pi. It looks weird, but that's what the answer is. Now, fractions work a little bit weird, all right? When you multiply by the reciprocal, all right, the reciprocal is the opposite. So the reciprocal of 1/2 would be 2 over 1. The reciprocal of 3/4 would be 4 over 3. If you multiply by the reciprocal, it cancels it out. So in this one, we want to try and get this f all by itself. So we want to get f equals as an answer. Well, I want to take and get rid of these parentheses first by getting rid of that fraction. So you can get rid of this 5/9 by multiplying by 9/5 and 9/5. Why does that work? Well, if you actually multiplied numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, top number times top number, bottom times bottom, you would get 45 over 45. That 45 over 45 just simplifies to 1, which is why these actually cancel out. So by multiplying by the reciprocal, the opposite, the flipped fraction, those will cancel out. So on this side, I have 9/5 c equals, when I bring it down, I can get rid of my parentheses, equals f minus 32. Now to get that f all by itself, I'm going to do plus 32 and plus 32. So on this side, I just have 9/5 c plus 32 equals f. This stuff is very, very weird, but that's how we're leaving our answer. All we're doing is rearranging. All right, we're rearranging to get our answer all by itself. Could you change that 9/5 into a decimal if you wanted to? Sure, you can do that as well. You could change that into being 1.8. All right, there would be nothing wrong with that. That's the formula for converting Fahrenheit to Celsius, by the way. Take a look at this next one. This next one is even stranger. All right. We are solving for A. So in order to get the A all by itself, we need to get rid of this plus B squared. We get rid of the plus B squared by doing minus B squared and minus B squared. C squared minus B squared. Now again, the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So to take the square root of this, we would have to take the square root of that whole entire side. The square and the square root cancel each other out. So we just have A equals, and then it's this whole thing. We just leave it exactly how it is. The square root of C squared minus B squared. In this next one, we are solving for H. So we want to try and get that H all by itself. Now, again, there's a couple different ways that you could do this one. Could you change it to be a 0.5? Sure, you could do that. And then divide by 0.5b and 0.5b? Sure, you could do that. Could you multiply by the reciprocal? Yes, you could. If you see that fraction and you want to go times 2 over 1 and times 2 over 1 so that those cancel out, that's a perfectly fine way to do it as well. So then we would have 2a equals bh. Divide by b so that those b's cancel out. So you end up with 2a over b equals h. So that's a fine way to do it. Let me do it that other way. All right, this would be a fine way to do it as well. All right, I'm just rewriting the question here. Another way to do this same problem, you're multiplying these three things together. So you could divide by 1/2 b and divide by 1/2 b so that those cancel out and those cancel out. So you have a divided by 1/2 b equals h. This would be a fine answer as well. All right, there's multiple different ways to do this. So we could also use a 0.5 instead of the 1/2. All right, there's again multiple ways to do this. Go ahead and try this first one on your own, please. Solve for R. Solve for R on your own, please. Solving for R, this really says interest equals principal times rate times time. So we're multiplying those three letters together. We want to try and get rid of the two things that we're multiplying by. So the easiest way to do this problem is to divide by PT and divide by PT. That's the easiest way to do it. So you get I divided by PT equals R. That's probably the simplest way to do it. Now, there are multiple answers for this one. All right, if I rewrite the problem here, there are multiple ways to do this. You could have chosen to divide each letter individually and go like divide by P, so that I have I divided by P equals RT, and then divide by T and divide the whole thing by T. So you get I divided by P all over T equals R. That would be a fine answer as well. Or you could do it a third way. All right, I'm going to go into this spot here. You could do it a third way also. The third way that you could do it is instead of dividing by P first, you could divide by T first. So that you have I divided by T equals PR. And then to get that R all by itself, you'd have to divide by P and divide this whole thing by P. So you'd get I divided by T all over P equals R. All three of these circled answers are technically correct. All right. Which is the easiest way? Definitely this first way, When you have three things that you're multiplying together, divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for. Right? We're solving for the R, so we're dividing by the P and the T at the same time. Take a look at the next one. In the next one, we want to solve for Y. Now, there is really technically an invisible set of parentheses around this top part of the fraction. So what you need to do first is you need to get rid of this divided by 4 first. You get rid of the divided by 4 by doing times 4 and times 4. So then we would have 4h equals r plus y. We're trying to get the y all by itself. So we're going to do minus r and minus r. So we end up with an answer of 4h minus r equals y. Very tricky there. Be careful. Whenever you have an operation like adding or subtracting that's in the top part of the fraction, there's really invisible set of parentheses there. Go ahead and try this next one on your own. Solve for x, please. Try this next one on your own. Solve for x. Trying to get the x all by itself, we need to get this f of x all by itself. So we always got to get, just like in a two-step equation, we got to get rid of the plus or minus whatever first. So minus 2y and minus 2y. So we have fx equals 3c minus 2y. This now says f times x. The opposite of times would be divide. So to get that x all by itself, I want to divide by f and divide by f. Remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Could you have done each and every term by the f's? Sure, but it's easier just to divide the whole thing by f. So you get a final answer of 3c minus 2y over f. Go ahead and try that last one on your own, please. A times b times c, all divided by 2 equals 4. So that whole thing is being divided by 2. So the first thing that we need to do is get rid of that divided by 2 by doing times 2 and times 2. So now I now have ABC equals 8. You can multiply those together. You don't need to leave it as 4 times 2. If they're both plain numbers, you can multiply them together. We're solving for A, so we really want to get the A all by itself and have A equals. This is really A times B times C. Again, anytime that you have multiple things that you're multiplying together, divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for. So the easiest way to do this one is divide by BC and divide by BC. Divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for. So A equals 8 divided by BC. Are there other ways that you could have done it? Sure. You could have, from this point, divided by B and divided by B, and then divided by C and divided by C. So you would have got 8 divided by B, all divided by C. Could you have divided by C first and then B? Sure. Again, on a lot of these questions, there are multiple answers.